So I'm editor-in-chief of IEEE Software for Ashalt, and since our special issue is focused on social networking, I'm here today talking to Dr. Ben Schneiderman. Ben is a professor at the University of Maryland's Computer Science Department, as well as the founder of the Human Computer Interaction Laboratory there. And Ben has made a long and storied career out of looking at human interface issues, but also the societal and the human impact of using computers. So I've invited him here to talk to us today about one of his ambitious ongoing projects. So thanks, Ben, for joining me.
Thanks, Forrest. Glad to be here.
Great. So one of the things I was really taken by was just the scope of the ambition of your Nation of Neighbors project. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about that today, and maybe you could kick us off by just giving a brief overview of the project.
Sure. The credit really goes to Art Hansen, and it's a wonderful story. Some 7 years ago, he was a programmer working in Rockville, Maryland, returned to his Jefferson County, West Virginia home at the end of the day and found it burglarized. And he then contacted his neighbors, and they were burglarized, and they worked together, and they developed a better understanding of what had happened, and eventually they solved their own crime. And he decided that he was going to make a website which would allow other neighbors in his community to report incidents, sometimes less serious than this one, of just small problems that go on in a neighborhood and questions that people had. So they had a greater sense of community, very much like Neighborhood Watch activities. Now, the kind of things they were reporting were below the things that you would call the police for, and so they developed a sense of community which made people feel safer and a great sense of enthusiasm. Art Hansen decided that he wanted to go national with his success story and began to develop what used to be called WatchJeffersonCounty.net into nationofneighbors.org. We received National Science Foundation funding to help understand what would make these communities succeed or not. And during the time, we studied more than 400 of the communities that Art Hansen had helped spawn across the country. And of those, only about 40 were really successful and durable. And so the question became, what was it that made the community work? They were all using the same software and website, but there were very different patterns. Some of them were actually initiated by police departments, others by neighborhood groups, or sometimes by individuals. And the real message of the story is simple and clear, that the successful communities all contained at least one and possibly two very active leaders who responded to questions, who initiated discussions, and who kept things moving. And so the secret sauce of community success is the human element, getting someone who is an active member, knowledgeable, informed, who cares about it, who becomes a leader within the community.
Great. That's a wonderful story, and one of the reasons I really wanted to talk today was, I mean, in the rest of the magazine we'll have so many things focused on the technology, on the software, but as you said so eloquently, I think that's really only part of the problem. And I can have the best software in the world, but if I don't have the right members of the community, or if I don't have the right human elements, then it's really not going to take off and be so durable and successful. So I wonder, one of the things you mentioned was that comes down to having some very active leaders in each of the communities that can make it be a successful and durable thing. Do you have any insights as to what either from the human side, what it takes to be a leader, or from the software side, maybe is there anything we can do to support those leaders more effectively?
Absolutely, right. The role of leaders in online communities is somewhat the same as the role of leaders in real-world communities, but there are some differences, and there are ways in which online communities can empower leaders to be more effective because they get a better sense of monitoring of what's actually happened. The data available to a leader of a community can be much more extensive, and the powers that a leader has can be more effective in dealing rapidly with problems, because leaders deal not only with success stories, but they deal with problems. I think the Wikipedia situation is a good example, And we had studied this. This is myself and Jenny Priest in an article called From Reader to Leader, which tells the story of what we saw as a common pattern of the way leaders emerge within communities. The 500 million readers of Wikipedia are an active group and vigorous and numerous, but of those, only 0.1%, only 1 in 1,000, register to make edits. And as you know, most of the people who make edits make only a single edit. A small number of people become very active contributors, and then of those, only a fraction become collaborators, where they start by sending email to other collaborators to discuss plans or projects, and they add commentary on the discussion pages of Wikipedia. In fact, the remarkable fact is that the discussion pages contain more text than the actual articles do in Wikipedia. It's such a vibrant community of collaborators. And of those collaborators, a small number go on to become leaders. Leaders are elected. They're called admins within Wikipedia. There are about 1,400 of them. And those are the people who deal with mentoring newcomers, setting policy, dealing with the large number of spam attacks, and deciding what's next for Wikipedia. And so we came to see this as a process of moving from reader to contributor, from contributor maybe to active contributor, from active contributor then on to collaborator who works with other people, and then to becoming a leader who engages in discussions about what policies should be. We think that's a good model. Not all communities will be as large as Wikipedia, but still the notion of these different levels of participation are important for designers to understand. And the trick is in building the software is to understand how do you motivate someone to go from reader to leader, and then how do you recognize and reward them. And that's really important. So, of course, contributors like to know that their edits in Wikipedia are not reverted and that they wind up making active contributions, and that others send them messages maybe thanking them for their contributions. And then the collaborators get a much more vigorous commentary and discussion going, so they really get to know each other. And the leaders yet further have other kind of ways that they gain recognition. Wikipedia has many forms of recognition, such as the Barn Stars and the featured articles, and these are ways that the people truly devoted seek to gain recognition. I've twice attended the Wikimania conference, and it's the most exciting conference I've ever been to. The enthusiasm of I think it was 900 people at the last meeting, and the energy devoted towards making Wikipedia a success story is it's inspiring to see.
That's great. It's that sense of enthusiasm, I think, is that, you know, many of the designers of social media sites are always going after it, and I think it's still a bit of a hard question about how you do generate it. Now, we were talking about leaders, and you mentioned recognition as being one of them. And I wonder, does that always mean public recognition, or could that be something that's behind the scenes? You know, I only need to be recognized within a small subset of the people that are also active in the site, or does it really need to be something where, you know, all the readers of the site would be able to see me in some way, shape, or form as a leader here?
It varies. There's no one formula that works. It depends on the size of the community and the different levels of respect. So you can well understand that among the admins, they want to be respected by the other admins. That's the primary thing. They want to know that they're doing a good job, and they want recognition for the good job they're doing. The broader recognition is maybe harder to get, but you know, the world of Facebook and others have shown that people like to get likes, and so simple mechanisms by which people can say thank you are really important. In fact, I think the message for the computing community is that we're shifting in our metrics of success. It used to be we thought of Moore's law as the way we measure the progress of petabytes and gigahertz and teraflops or petaflops. But those are measures of machine performance. The increasingly important aspect is what computing technology empowers people to do. And so the measures we want to look at are the mega contribs and the tera thank yous that are on the web. And that's how we will assess the success and the productivity of these groups. So Wikipedia is approximately 200 mega contribs, which is contribs is the word that Wikipedia uses for a single edit or contribution. And that's what it takes to make the 3 million or 3.5 million articles that are in Wikipedia, the English version.
Now, you mentioned productivity there, and I think that's one of the things, when I think about social media sites, I often come back and think about how much of the content that's out there is built by volunteers, and so how much harder it is to get people to contribute their own personal time. I think that's harder in many cases than contributing dollars or money into the pot, because time is so much more precious for many of us. I wonder, how important is it that things be streamlined, that you make the job of these leaders as efficient as possible, or if you give them sufficient recognition, will they? I think in a lot of cases I see people that are so committed to doing the work that they'll put up with a few things that are clunky or not quite as efficient as they could be, just because they still feel the reward from what they're doing.
Absolutely. You're right. There's a whole range of ways. Money is one form, but not always the most effective. In fact, sometimes counterproductive, it turns out. And that personal recognition, especially within communities, I mean, we know this well in the scholarly community, getting someone to cite your work or praise it in a public, in a paper or at a conference is a really big thing. And people, academics will do a lot of work in order to get the kind of recognition from peers. Of course, it pays off well when tenure cases or promotion come along or awards are given. And so the academic community over hundreds of years has developed a vast array of strategies to promote recognition for high-quality contributions. Similarly, online, we're finding there's a range of ways in which people appreciate getting recognition. For some people, just the likes or the number of downloads of a video, a YouTube video, are the kind of honor they seek. Other times they want to have lots of comments made about their work, or citations or links to it. The blogosphere is filled with these different counts of the success of blog sites and RSS feeds, and so there's lots of ways, and we're only at the beginning stages of trying to figure out the motivational structure for successful online communities. The things we've talked about are increasingly important and address national priorities like community safety, but think about disaster response or health care and wellness. How do you motivate people to reduce smoking or fight obesity or stop drug taking? These are very difficult challenges. They're more than just a little contrib or a half an hour of editing a document. They are life changes, and making those things happen are really the national agenda here. And so the software designers who try out these different methods and create motivational structures through the software are potentially enormously influential for the future health, security, and wealth of the U.S. and every country in the world.
Wow, that's really nicely the way you said that. I think people don't often recognize the power that they have to change some of the things that are bothering us in the national conversation sometimes. Right. Just before we leave the question of reward structure, one last issue. I just wanted to pick up on the comment that you made that sometimes having extra dollars in the mix can be counterproductive. I think often we tend to think about that as saying, well, I have extra dollars, I can add better features now that will get more people interested in my site, or I can pay people, to put some of their time in. But how can dollars be counterproductive?
The different people have different motivations, and sometimes the volunteer ethic is what people appreciate. So the extreme cases may be in blood donation. In some countries, money is offered for blood donors. In other countries, it's prohibited, but celebrated as a community contribution. And people are willing to do that. They will do a great deal, including donate blood, especially in times of hardship, if that's going to be helpful. I'm particularly influenced by a paper by Batson and his researchers, which focused on the motivations. There are egocentric motivations, things that benefit you, either money or recognition. And then there are altruistic reasons. People will do things for the good of the community, for the good of others, let's say. The third motivation Batson outlines is benefiting the community. People will do a lot for their school or their sports team or their company in order to make them successful, or their neighborhood. And then the last principle is the idea of what he calls principlism, which is they do it for the principle. They were taught, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, and therefore they will do the good deeds of picking up trash in their neighborhood, helping a neighbor, doing a good deed. We were very motivated to get into this by the story in France a few years ago of a summer heat wave that killed 15,000 elderly citizens because nobody brought them a bottle of cold water or took them to an air-conditioned place. That same summer, 1,300 had died in Chicago. And so, the questions become, how do we motivate people to take a greater interest in their community and to contribute in all these possible ways, from, the small things of picking up trash or making a neighborhood garden, or participating in neighborhood watch, or these health-related issues of smoking cessation and obesity reduction. And there are just many, many other ways that individual contributions can make a huge difference. I think you might want to see the new book by Stephen Johnson called Future Perfect, where he talks about a new way of solving problems. It's neither the government nor the companies that solve the problems, but what he calls peer progressives, individuals mobilizing through the internet, being able to collaborate because the barriers to collaboration have been dramatically reduced, and thereby solving world problems and making a better world. The notion of social entrepreneurship has gained widespread attention, and the book by David Bornstein tells how to do it, actually 2 books. So those are sort of hopeful messages, but remember there's also, a downside. There's malicious use of these nets in communities. There's the spammers and the hackers who will seek to undermine them. There are racial hate groups and terrorists and criminals who also are very effective in using these means, which is why research is needed to understand how to make sure that these community services that we are building are put to work in very positive ways. It's not an easy problem, but it's something that I think will become a major issue in the coming decades.
And that's a very nice segue into something else I really wanted to ask you about today, which is to what extent can you, when you're trying to build a social network supporting site like these, to what extent can you kind of define the things top down that people would want to do with it, and to what extent do you need to let things bubble up from below? I've seen, for example, a couple places where organizations are trying to build, let's say, a lessons learned repository for their organization, and it's going to have a social aspect, where people are going to be sharing tips and tricks from themselves. And often, if it's defined from the top down, you just don't get the buy-in from people. But if you leave it to be defined from the bottom up, people get very nervous because they don't know what they're going to get or how successful it's going to be. So I wondered, with Nation of Neighbors, how how well defined is it what each of the community watch groups might do with their space on the network, or does it just come out very emergent in an emergent way?
Your question is very appropriate, and again, the answer is there's a wide range, and we still are just beginning to understand it. I would say that your example of top-down management that puts up a website and expects people to participate is often based on naive or poor understanding of what the social motivations are. It is not true that if you build it, they will come. There needs to be a social motivation, a feedback, a response, and a reward and recognition structure. And so those are really important design features. Our colleague Gerhard Fischer at University of Colorado made a remarkable study inside a large corporation with 120,000 users, I believe, and there was the management had put up an answer board where people could ask questions and help each other by answering. And it was moderately successful. But the intervention that Fisher and his team did was to simply count the number of times a person answered a question. So simply that little recognition, there was no suggestion that this would be part of your evaluation or promotional materials, but just the way that you get a recognition of a point for every time you answer a question made a dramatic difference in increasing willingness of people to answer questions. So those kind of features are really important to understand and try out, and they will be very different. The solutions in a large corporation may be quite different from those in a neighborhood group, and again, quite different in an alcohol or substance abuse prevention group.
But is it important to have the flexibility for groups to discover for themselves what they want to do, or is that?
I think so. Okay. I think so. I think the flexibility not only just to discover, but to explore and to become a leader. How as groups emerge, do you promote, the effective leaders and give them more power? Stack Overflow or Slashdot have mechanisms by which people gain recognition and their contributions are valued more because of all the good deeds they've done, and same in Wikipedia. And we have dozens of interesting examples, but we need an overriding theory and a deeper science that will allow us to be more successful in predicting what works in different circumstances. Computer scientists need to be much more open towards social issues. This is where our future lies. The challenges we face in the coming decades are the solution of complex social problems which require a deep understanding of context, and the old-fashioned reductionist model of science is giving way to a newer approach which deals with context in a more substantial way. For the first time in history, much of what we do is online, and for the first time in history, we have the tools of visualization and analysis to be able to understand what's going on and thereby intervene so as to make changes online. So every tool that a software engineer builds should also be a research tool and an environment in which interventions can be easily placed so as to monitor then how it influences the outcomes.